Before we dive into this unbelievable Wild West tale, let me ask you something. What would you do if a single moment changed your entire destiny? If one decision, made in the dust and silence of an empty prairie, brought danger, mystery, and a love you never expected? As we uncover this powerful story, take a moment to subscribe, share, and comment, so you never miss the next chapter of these gripping legends. Now take a deep breath, settle in, and let's get started with this story. A story where courage is tested, trust is shattered, and fate rides in like a storm over the desert. He didn't remember when the desert turned against him. All he knew was that the heat pressed on his back like a hammer, and every breath tasted like dust and copper. Luke Carver had survived gunfights, stampedes, storms, and long nights without sleep, but nothing tested him the way this bleeding wound did. He held the reins with trembling fingers, forcing his eyes to stay open as red mesas blurred into each other. Somewhere behind him were men he'd fought, and ahead of him was nothing but land that didn't care if he lived or died. His horse staggered under him, sides heaving, legs trembling from exhaustion. Luke wanted to stop, but he knew stopping meant letting the desert bury him right where he fell. The sun hung overhead like a cruel overseer, hammering down on skin already cracked and burned. He felt sweat slide down his spine, then felt it no more. His body was running dry, drained by blood loss and the brutal heat. When his vision dimmed to a thin tunnel of light, he whispered to himself to stay awake, but the desert didn't listen. His grip loosened, and he toppled. He hit the ground with a force that knocked the last breath out of him. The earth beneath him felt hot enough to blister skin. His horse stood over him for a moment, shocked and confused, before stepping back as if sensing death creeping close. Luke tried to roll onto his back but failed. He tried to raise his head, but it throbbed with each heartbeat. All he could do was listen to the wind hiss across the sand and wonder if this was where his story ended. The thought didn't scare him. What scared him was dying unseen, unheard, and unnoticed. The vultures saw him first. Black wings circled in slow spirals high above, patient as the grave itself. Luke watched them with half-lidded eyes, knowing exactly what they were waiting for. He wanted to curse, but he didn't have the strength. The smell of dust filled his lungs, and each breath felt like swallowing needles. He shut his eyes, letting the world blur away. He didn't expect anyone to find him. He didn't expect mercy. He didn't expect anything at all. But someone else was already watching him. From the shadows between jagged rocks, a pair of steady eyes studied the fallen cowboy. The figure stepped forward, soundless and sure-footed. A woman moved into the open, tall and strong, her skin sun-bronzed, her hair braided with beads that clicked softly when she walked. She wore buckskin stitched with careful hands and carried a bow slung across her back. Her presence was calm, but her gaze sharp enough to cut through stone. She stopped beside Luke and knelt slowly. She touched his shoulder, testing for life. Her fingers felt the warmth of blood, the weak pulse beneath his skin, and the tightness of muscles fighting to hold on. He was as close to death as a man could be without crossing the line. She studied his face, then looked at the markings left by the bullet wound. She could have turned away, let the desert finish what the gunmen started. He was a stranger, an outsider, a cowboy wandering into land he did not understand. Yet something in his stubborn hold on life stirred her. The wind carried distant hoofbeats, faint but unmistakable. She glanced toward the horizon and saw riders moving slowly, searching, maybe for him, maybe for someone else. It didn't matter. The desert was not safe today. She looked back at the cowboy lying wounded in the dirt. Her jaw tightened with a decision. She whistled, low and sharp. A paint mare stepped from behind the rocks, ears pricked forward. The woman placed a steady hand on the horse's neck before turning back to Luke. His eyelids fluttered when she nudged him. He saw her silhouette through the haze of pain, unsure if she was real or some spirit come to collect him. Before he could speak, her voice cut through the heat with calm certainty. She said the words that would follow him for the rest of his life. "Get on my horse, handsome cowboy. You will not die here, not alone." The words struck him harder than any bullet. Her voice held authority, compassion, and something else he couldn't name. She hauled him up with surprising strength. He groaned, the sound raw and painful, but she didn't hesitate. She lifted him into the saddle, climbing up behind him with practiced ease. She wrapped one arm around his torso to keep him upright, guiding the reins with the other. With a quiet command, the horse lunged forward into the maze of canyons. Luke leaned back against her, his consciousness slipping in and out like a candle flickering in a storm. Every rock and jolt sent pain ripping through him, but her grip held him steady, refusing to let go. The canyon swallowed them whole. Shadows cooled the air as she took narrow paths carved by centuries of wind and water. She moved with confidence, knowing every turn, every dangerous drop, every hidden bend. Twice she stopped, listening for riders, but the wind carried no threat. Luke felt himself drifting again, barely aware of the world around him. The woman tightened her arm around him. "Stay awake," she ordered quietly. He tried, but his vision blurred into streaks of color and darkness. Her voice became the only thread, keeping him tethered to life. By the time they reached a small hollow hidden deep within the canyon walls, Luke had lost all sense of time. She dismounted first, catching him before he could fall. She carried him to a shelter made of cedar branches and hides stitched with expert skill. When she lowered him to the ground, he felt the cool shade touch his skin for the first time in hours. She knelt beside him and opened a small pouch filled with herbs, tools, and strips of clean cloth. Her movements were precise, steady, and confident. She poured water over the wound, washing away the blood and dust. Luke gasped at the cold shock, his eyes snapping open. Her face hovered above his, framed by the dim light filtering through the shelter. "Who are you?" he whispered, barely audible. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she placed a firm hand on his chest, pushing him back gently. "Rest," she said. "Words will not save you, but I might." His eyes closed again, not from weakness but from trust he didn't understand. She heated a small blade in the fire until it glowed faintly, then began to stitch the wound with sinew thread. Luke stirred, groaning in pain, but she kept working. Her hands were steady even as his breath shook. When he tried to pull away, she tightened her grip and said quietly, "You fight like a wild horse. Good, fight, but stay still." She bandaged him carefully, applying a paste that burned like fire. He tensed, teeth clenched, and she held him down until the pain settled into a dull throb. Hours passed. She sat beside him, listening to his breathing. He was alive, but barely. She studied his face again, searching for something she could not name. "You are stubborn," she murmured, "and stubborn men live longer than the desert wants them to." She placed another cloth over his forehead and leaned back, letting the fire cast flickering shadows across the shelter. Outside, the canyon wind whispered through the rocks. Inside, the wounded cowboy slept, unaware that fate had just changed its course because an Apache woman refused to let death take him alone. Luke woke to the soft crackle of a fire and the scent of herbs, sharp and earthy. The pain in his side pulsed like a drum, but the world no longer spun around him. His eyes adjusted to the dim shelter, and he saw her sitting near the entrance, carved by the firelight into something half real, half legend. She didn't look at him at first. She was listening to the wind, as though it whispered secrets only she could hear. When she finally glanced his way, he managed a weak smile, surprised to still be breathing. She nodded once, as if approving his stubbornness. She brought him water in a wooden bowl, lifting his head gently to help him drink. Her hands were warm, steady, confident. He coughed, gasped, but drank greedily. When she set the bowl aside, he tried to speak, but she raised a hand to silence him. "Save your strength. Your body still fights. You must let it win." Luke wanted to argue, but she was right. His muscles felt heavy, as though someone had filled his bones with sand. He lay back, breathing slow, feeling the weight of exhaustion tug at him like a tide. Over the next 2 days, he drifted between fever dreams and moments of clarity. Each time he opened his eyes, she was there, grinding herbs, tending the fire, sharpening her knife, watching the canyon with the eyes of a hunter. She barely spoke, but her presence was constant, like a shield between him and whatever waited outside. Sometimes she hummed under her breath old melodies carried from her childhood. The sound soothed him, easing the pain, anchoring him in reality. Even when he slipped back into sleep, he felt her near, guarding him from the silent desert. On the 4th morning, he managed to push himself upright, leaning against the cave wall. The world still swayed, but he felt stronger. She approached quietly, crouching beside him. "You heal fast," she said, her tone unreadable. "Good. You will need your strength." He frowned. "Need it for what?" Her gaze drifted toward the canyon mouth. "Danger follows wounded men, and danger has found our tracks." Luke's chest tightened. "The riders," she nodded, "they search still. The land has been restless with their noise." He clenched his jaw, guilt twisting inside him. "I brought trouble to your home." She shook her head. "Trouble rides for everyone. We meet it standing." She helped him outside to stretch his legs, supporting him with a firm grip. The canyon air felt cooler than the open desert, shaded by towering walls of red stone. Birds darted overhead, their cries echoing between the rocks. He breathed slowly, feeling strength return with each lungful of clean air. She pointed out tracks in the dust, hoofprints too deep to be casual riders. Whoever hunted him wasn't giving up. Luke swallowed hard, realizing what that meant for her. "You saved me," he said quietly. "I don't want that to cost you your life." She gave him a long, steady look. A life spent running from danger is not a life. We face it when it comes. That afternoon, she handed him his rifle, cleaned and loaded. His hands trembled slightly when he held it, she noticed. "Pain makes you shake," she said, "not fear. Do not confuse the two." He managed a small grin. "How'd you get to be so wise?" She shrugged. "The land teaches. Loss teaches more." Her honesty hit him harder than expected. He wanted to ask about her husband, the warrior she still carried in her heart, but her expression warned him that question belonged to another time. Instead, he focused on steadying his weapon, his breathing, his mind. By sunset, the riders appeared, 4 silhouettes on the horizon, creeping into the canyon like wolves sniffing blood. Luke and the woman took positions above the narrow trail where the canyon funneled into a choke point. She knelt like a statue carved from the cliffs, bow drawn, her braid resting along her shoulder. Luke lay on his stomach, rifle braced against a rock. His pulse hammered, but her calmness steadied him. She whispered, "When they reach the shadow of the tall stone, you take the second rider." "I will take the first," he nodded, trusting her judgment more than his own instincts. The first rider crossed into range. Her arrow struck before his horse even sensed danger. The man toppled silently, hitting the ground with a dull thud. Luke pulled the trigger, the recoil jarring his still healing ribs. His shot dropped the second rider cleanly. Chaos erupted. The remaining 2 drew their guns, firing blindly at the cliffs. The canyon echoed with gunfire. Dust exploded around them. Luke ducked behind cover, gritting his teeth as pain flared. She stood, fluid as river wind, releasing a second arrow that caught the third rider in the throat. The fourth fled. She didn't hesitate. She whistled sharply and her mare sprang forward. She mounted in one swift motion and chased the last rider through the canyon. Luke watched, heart pounding, as she disappeared behind the rocks. Minutes later she returned, calm as ever, reins in one hand, the danger gone. She dismounted without a word. He stared at her, awe mixing with relief. "You're fearless," he said. She shook her head. "No one is fearless, but some fears do not get to decide our actions." Back in the shelter, she checked his bandages again. Her hands were gentle now, not urgent like before. The worst was behind them. He caught her wrist lightly. "You saved me twice, maybe 3 times. Well, she didn't answer immediately. Instead, she sat down beside him, looking into the fire as though searching for words in the flames. "Because no one deserves to die alone," she said softly. "Not even a wandering man who looks for home in every direction except inward." Her voice carried weight, truth, and something else he couldn't name. He felt her words settle in him like roots. "I don't know where home is anymore," he admitted. "Maybe you're not meant to know yet," she replied. "Maybe the land hasn't shown you," he swallowed. "Maybe it's here, maybe it's with you." She didn't look surprised. She didn't pull away. She only lifted her eyes to meet his, calm and deep as river water. "The desert gives gifts in strange ways," she murmured. "Some you do not expect, some you do not refuse." When he finally stood strong enough to ride, she saddled her mare and handed him the reins. He thought she meant to send him away, but instead she stepped closer, placing her hand lightly on his chest. "You can leave," she said, "or you can choose. The choice must be yours, not shaped by fear or gratitude." Luke looked out at the open land stretching beyond the canyon. For the first time in years, it didn't feel empty. He turned back to her. "My choice is where you are." Her eyes softened. "Then ride with me." He mounted first, pulling her up behind him the same way she had done when she saved his life. Her arms wrapped around his waist, steady and strong. The wind rose as they guided the horse toward the canyon's exit, sunlight spilling across the red stones like a blessing. The desert watched them leave, no longer hunter and wounded stranger, but 2 souls choosing a path no map had ever marked. And together they rode into the vast, untamed horizon where their story would begin, not as legend, but as truth the West would whisper for generations.